Like, how did you learn that, right? I think I might have just learned that talking to you. I just knew it wasn't recyclable.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Do What You Can for the People, the show that nobody asked for. I'm your hostess, Nicole, and I'm very, very excited about today's guest. Today, we have Kathy Pazakis, the Executive Vice President Commercial at TerraCycle. Kathy recently joined TerraCycle after almost a decade in the beauty industry, leading product innovation and strategy for Glossier and the Estee Lauder companies. Through these roles, Kathy saw the rising importance of sustainability to consumers and heard firsthand their expectations for brands to take responsibility for their products and packaging. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I thought we'd kind of kick off with just a little bit of an introduction as to how this episode came about. So season 3 of my show is dedicated to the holidays, and I thought that with the new year upon us, a lot of people in my circles and myself are feeling inspired by all the big changes in sustainability that are happening. And I see a lot of people resolving to live a lower impact lifestyle. So many of us are already recycling, but I think very few of us realize that we're doing it incorrectly. I don't know about you, but every week I get a message from a friend or colleague with the question, can I put this highly specific item into my recycling bin? And I always respond with, well, there's no real standard answer. It depends on your municipality. I can say with pretty strong confidence that most recycling centers won't accept small plastics or plastic film. And if you put some of those like non-accepted materials into your bin, it can actually contaminate the entire load, or at the very least severely slow down the recycling process. And without fail, people are always shocked. They're like, what? I've been screwing up so much and contributing to the problem. So if one of your goals for 2020 is to kind of reduce your environmental impact, I hope this episode kind of sheds some light on that for you. And the goal here is to really spread some knowledge on what the infrastructure is in the US, and more importantly, how we can kind of put more pressure on brands to extend their material responsibility and develop some better systems, which is a lot of the work that I think TerraCycle does.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just to what you're calling out, 100%. Like, I can't tell you how many times I screw it up, and I'm like pretty deeply immersed. But there are things that you think, oh, this is big and plastic. Of course it should be. But how would you know that the pump in your body lotion has a metal spring in it and therefore renders the whole thing unrecyclable? Like, what people don't realize is just because you put it in the recycling bin doesn't mean it ends up getting recycled. And I think it's truly a challenge because, as you said, it varies by municipality. It varies down to like the kind of sorting facility that your recycling center uses. And I'll also say we've been talking to a bunch of municipalities about recycling because everyone expects it to be this public good. Like, it should be something that the government is responsible for, or it should be something that someone else is thinking of. And they're telling us that they're seeing record rates of contamination in the recycling they're receiving. And because the price of oil has dropped so dramatically, right, and plastic comes from oil, it's actually become expensive for them. It's become a cost center for them to run recycling programs because virgin material is cheaper than recycled material. So I think we're just seeing the confluence of a lot of good intentions and no infrastructure. And to be honest, that's where TerraCycle comes into play, right? Because TerraCycle very specifically focuses on recycling what's called the unrecyclable. And our founder, Tom, I'm sure you've heard his spiel, is that nothing is actually unrecyclable. It's just that you have to fix the business equation such that the recycler wants to recycle that, right? When I was in beauty at Glossier, we were told over and over from recycling facilities that anything that had a dimension that was smaller than 2 inches couldn't be recycled. It would fall through the filter. And so we were always just confounded by that because lots of beauty products have a dimension that's smaller than 2 inches, right? Like, think about boy brow or a mascara or a lip gloss. And it was really eye-opening in my first conversation with TerraCycle to have Tom say, actually, that's completely recyclable. It's just not profitable for that recycling center to set their filter to catch these small things. Because at the end of the day, the recycler is trying to make money on that. They're trying to take your raw material and turn it into something that they can sell as a raw material, as an input into something else. That's why aluminum and glass are easy. There's always a market for that on the other side, but plastic is challenging. So so TerraCycle is very much focused on recycling the unrecyclable. It's literally everything from cosmetics, as we were talking about, to cigarette butts, to your chip bags, to used chewing gum. TerraCycle has really pioneered ways to enable those products to be recycled at the end of life.
And we love the work that you do. It's so important, and we're so grateful for it. I think before we kind of dive into the specifics of what TerraCycle does, I always like to frame the problem and share with the people some facts and figures that they may not know. So I did a little bit of internet sleuthing, and I found out that the average American will produce about 5.91 pounds of trash in a day. And while you might be splitting that 50-50 into recycling and trash, only about 1.5 pounds of that is being recycled. So that, I think, is a huge indicator of the fact that we might be putting it into the bins that we think is appropriate, but is it actually getting into the right stream? As you mentioned, there are a lot of issues with recycling centers not accepting materials because it's not profitable. But one of the interesting things that I found, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is related to the China ban. And this kind of leads into the infrastructure problem, is because the US has had this long history of exporting our plastics specifically to China, or other countries once the China ban came in, we've never built that infrastructure here to kind of process those plastics, process those hard to recycle materials. And so it's wonderful to see how TerraCycle has stepped into this void in the market to work directly with brands and solve that problem.
Yeah, I think it's that's 100% true. And I think the other piece of that is not only do we not have the infrastructure, but a lot of market for that secondary, like the output of what comes out of recycling, also dried up because China wasn't taking it. So the challenge is, even if you had the infrastructure here in the US, if you had that capability, you suddenly didn't have a place to put your raw material at the end. So it again shot up the cost of recycling the material, and, you know, if anything, made virgin plastic even more attractive to brands.
Yeah. I know this wasn't on the list of questions I asked you, but I'd love to kind of hear your take on extended producer responsibility, because I feel like that has a tie to TerraCycle's mission. And for everyone who is not aware of what that is, it's kind of putting the burden on the producer of a material to think about not just where that material is going to go through its life cycle to the point of sale, but beyond point of sale, and think about the disposal and the responsible use of that material.
Yeah. So do I have to caveat this and say all these views are my own?
Sure, you can put that in there.
I'll put that caveat in. But I think it's really interesting because there have been, as you talked about with COVID, people are now super conscious of the waste that they're producing and the impact that you have on the environment. And then related to that, we've seen more and more surveys where I think the last Ipsos survey I saw said something like 80 or 90% of consumers now feel it's manufacturer responsibility to think all the way through end of life for a product. And frankly, I don't know if it's because people are realizing the government can't do it, or if they're now realizing that me as a consumer, this is now my responsibility to think about the entirety of a product life cycle. But I agree with extended manufacturer responsibility, because right now no one else is stepping in to fill it, right? It's not like anyone is writing checks to your local municipality to suddenly fund more recycling. So if it's not a public service, which unfortunately it's not, someone has to step into there. And I do feel that manufacturers, if they're making money off of a product, have to be responsible to what happens at it at the end. And I know you said you consult with the circular economy. We've seen a lot of discussion at the EMF level and the new plastics economy level. Like, we're seeing brands and companies really take responsibility for thinking about now refillable packaging. Mm-hmm. And now, how do I work with the network of retail stores that I distribute in order to capture things at the end of life? I think you'll see that Europe is more advanced than we are here in the US. They've trained consumers, and consumers are taking responsibility for the sorting and the transport of their recyclables to recycling locations. And I think that's a behavior that we'll see come to the US also.
Here's hoping. Awesome. Well, thanks for kind of sharing your perspective on that. And let's get back into some of the questions that I did send you. So you kind of dug into this a little bit, but tell us what makes TerraCycle's mission and model very different from traditional or curbside recycling.
So I think there are two things that really differentiate TerraCycle from curbside recycling. One is the type of waste that's recycled. So as I mentioned before, TerraCycle really focuses in recycling the unrecyclable. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still a huge problem with curbside recycling. Unfortunately, we recycle just a tiny fraction, as you were saying before, of the amount of waste that exists out there. But TerraCycle tries to solve for things that are not traditionally curbside recyclable. So that's one. And then the second is how we go about collecting it, right? So TerraCycle has engaged consumers directly on behalf of brands. And this is where TerraCycle is really interesting because it's part marketing company and part recycling company. Because what we do is we raise awareness about recycling. We raise awareness of the brand's efforts to that. We actually enlist individuals and consumers as the collectors of that waste to send it back into the program. And we do a number of consumer-facing promotions to get people engaged with the brand and with the recycling program. And I think that's where we're slightly different from municipal recycling from that way.
Absolutely. And if I could just add to that, I think what I love is how you're educating people on you don't have to take those hard to recycle goods and throw them in the trash. There are other options, and it's making people think more about every item in their house and where it's going to go at the end of its life. So love that. One of the questions that I always get as someone who works in the circular economy, and something that I've actually talked to some of your team members at TerraCycle about, is how are you guys using these hard to recycle materials? Like, what are you doing with them?
They go into any number of streams. We have some companies who are working with us on closed loop products where the waste they recycle then is actually then turned into a raw material input for future packaging of their product. So I think that's great, right? That's the gold standard. But some standout other examples of things that we do is we will grind it up and turn it into things like shipping pallets, right? Like, so those wooden pallets are now being replaced by pallets made out of recycled content, and those are reusable. Picnic tables, playground equipment. We're even exploring some really interesting. We're exploring some really interesting applications in other ways that enable kids to play, or other ways. Because what we try to do is turn our recycled materials into things that people can use in everyday life. Because one of the biggest drivers we've found that changes consumer behavior is actually seeing the impact of what they're doing. So when we run a recycling program or we run a promotion, we'll oftentimes talk about taking the waste that's collected during that promotion and turning it into a playground, a community garden, something in a food-starved area, so that people can see the impact of not only recycling on the environment, but recycling in their specific environment.
So cool. Love that. And I love the community focus there, because I think that if we can get crap out of our houses in a responsible way and see the direct impact directly in our community, that's just like the best solution to any issue. So excited to see what comes of that in the future with TerraCycle. You talked about this a little bit earlier about how with brands and companies, you kind of have to make the business case for engaging in a project like this, a partnership with TerraCycle. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what's in it for these brands, apart from like if they can close the loop. That's obviously one benefit, but why are brands choosing to partner with TerraCycle, and how have you rallied so many of them to the cause?
So I think first and foremost, it goes back to the first thing you talked about, which is that consumers are becoming more aware, right? When I was at Glossier, the number one comment that we'd get back from people that they would email us and DM us about was about whether or not packaging was recyclable or refillable, or how was it sustainable, right? So I think, to be honest, consumers are driving change in brand behavior, and brands, they've always liked the sustainability halo, but now they're being held to that, right? That's a requirement for a consumer to want to buy the brand. I think especially as you're seeing, I hate to stereotype, but like especially as you look at millennial and Gen Z shoppers, they're really shopping, they're putting their money where their mouth is, right? They want to buy things from brands where they align with those values. And so I think brands are feeling the responsibility to do more of these recycling programs. Two, I think TerraCycle programs will actually allow brands to make claims of recyclability. In the US, you can only claim that something is recyclable if I think 60% of the public has access to it. And so by working through a TerraCycle program, you can actually then claim that your product is recyclable, which we are told is in the top, I think, 3 or 5 attributes that consumers look at when they're making purchase decisions. So again, consumer purchasing power is driving brand decision. And I think the last piece really that we're seeing is that brands are all making commitments. They've all signed up for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They've probably signed up for the circularity commitment. And 2025 is coming up really quickly. Brands are realizing that we have to change our model substantially in order to keep our promises.
So true. And I think also long term, by kind of retaining that consumer loyalty, I think they're seeing the business advantage there, that people will continue to buy from them because they're thinking forward and because they're kind of incorporating more of this mission-driven attitude into their brand. So I think that's always a great incentive for people to think about long-term use of their products.
Exactly. And I think it also helps them to stand out from other brands who are not, right? Like you can, even in some categories where it's not top of mind, like pet food packaging, for example, right? Being able to talk about the fact that you think about the end of life of this pouch sets you apart from all of the other pouches on that shelf.
Absolutely. So let's kind of dive into some of the nitty gritty. I pulled together a small list of what I think are some standout recycling programs, and I'm happy to quickly run through them. And if you'd like to add anything, just feel free to interrupt me. So the first one I listed here is your coffee pod recycling program, because I just thought that's so cool. I just moved a few weeks ago and I needed to buy myself a coffee maker. So I opted for Nespresso because I like the fact that they have their own built-in program. But I think that using TerraCycle's coffee pod recycling program is such a great alternative if you already have like a Keurig or whatever it may be, and you don't want to buy a whole new machine, which quite frankly is a more wasteful thing to do, to just kind of collect your pods and send them to TerraCycle.
Yeah, no, I think coffee pods are among the top office materials that we collect, because not only you at home as an individual, but think about when we used to have offices, how many offices had Nespressos and Keurigs. And I think this is maybe back to your point about brands and why they're doing this. Brands want to continue to deliver a customer experience that delights their customers, right? And like the pod was a breakthrough in coffee. It is so not messy. It is perfectly measured. It's wonderful, right? But it's not recyclable. So what a program like TerraCycle's program allows you to do is be able to enjoy the customer experience that you want and know that you're not throwing that end product into a landfill.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of my favorite things about TerraCycle is that they're finding innovative solutions to help people be more sustainable without compromising on their lifestyle. And that to me is so important, because as someone who's an advocate for sustainability, I'm not going to sit here and tell you you should only use a French press because you can compost your coffee grounds. I used a French press for 2 years. It is super annoying to clean that thing out every day. I get it. And if you can find the convenience factor with a lower impact, then absolutely go for that. We don't want people to compromise on their quality of life.
Right. And also think about, as you were saying before, infrastructure is really hard. Like I live in a suburb of New Jersey, and I had to search for and find a private compost program because the compost facilities around here only take municipal compost. Like there's no drop-off place for me to do it. And to be perfectly honest, I really don't want to compost in my own backyard. So like you need the infrastructure to be able to do it.
Absolutely. The next program I listed was super interesting to me, the Bosch & Lomb contact lens recycling program.
I love that program.
I have worn contacts since I was like 13 years old, so I'm not going to expose how old I am, but that is a long ass time. And I had to switch to dailies a few years ago because of my allergies, and it was a huge decision for me to make because I didn't want to have all that extra waste. It's the packaging of each of the individual lenses, which is made of plastic and foil, and then also the actual lenses themselves. And what I love about this program is that you guys take it all.
Yeah, it's my favorite program because I also am a dailies user, because frankly it transformed my eyes. It was one of those things where it was like good for me, good for the environment.
Yeah.
But like that product is literally the definition of a microplastic, right? When you think about that poor the National Geographic article with the poor seahorse holding the cotton swab, we were like, I am directly throwing this in the ocean.
Yeah.
So I love that program. I think it's amazing. You know, Bausch & Lomb is truly an innovative eye care company. I think they were leaps and bounds ahead of everyone thinking about that. And I think that program should be huge and everyone in America should be taking advantage of it.
And it's so easy. From what I remember, you can use any box to collect them, and
Yeah.
then when the box is full, ship it off with a prepaid label.
Yes, it is prepaid, or you can drop it off at your ophthalmologist's office too, if they're participating locations.
So it's
So
so easy. You have no excuse like anymore to participate in this. On a similar note of kind of personal care was the Colgate oral care recycling program. And I think a lot of people don't know that toothpaste tubes are incredibly difficult to recycle. You can't just throw it into your bin, even if it's made of a plastic or aluminum. You actually have to cut it open and scrape out all of the leftover toothpaste from inside and wash it. And then maybe, depending on your municipality, it might be recyclable. So I thought this was a great program because they accept the toothpaste tubes, the toothbrushes, which are also really difficult to recycle. Even if you have a bamboo toothbrush, you have to make sure that the bristles aren't plastic because that's a dual material. So really lovely to see that a brand has kind of taken ownership of this and been like, we know it's tough out there. We're going to do it for you.
yeah, I think that Colgate has been a long-term partner, so absolutely amazing. And I know they're doing a ton of research into trying to find if they can make a tube that is municipally recyclable. But I think this one gets to the problem we were talking about before, which is who even thought that they needed to cut open the tube and scrape out all the toothpaste inside? Like, how did you learn that, right? I think I might have just learned that talking to you. I just knew it wasn't recyclable. So it's such a complex world out there. Um, TerraCycle really simplifies it. It allows you to honestly live your life and find a way to do it in a green way.
Yep. Another personal care item, the Gillette razor. So similar to how I learned about the toothpaste, this was in a circular economy class that I took in my MBA in sustainability. So it's not shocking that people don't know about this. But we did our project based on razors and why they're not accepted at municipal recycling locations. And I actually had the opportunity to interview someone from TerraCycle about the Gillette program because they're made of multiple materials and the blades are actually a hazard in municipal recycling centers. So the fact that TerraCycle will kind of accept all of that and sort it by hand very carefully and make sure the materials get into the right stream to be processed is, I think, something that people don't think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's great about that program too is one, Gillette also takes that package. So, the plastic shell that it comes in with the film, we can also recycle that as part of the program. So Gillette really thought holistically about how do we recycle everything. And also Gillette has been taking a lot of these learnings. I think they're working on making their products as recyclable either through TerraCycle or curbside recyclable as possible. Like they really take sustainability seriously.
Love that. The last one I want to talk about is Newell Brand's home fragrance recycling program, which this really caught my eye because I'm a candle junkie. And I do take the time to pour hot water into my candles when they're at the end and remove the wax. And I have a wax warmer on my Christmas wish list. So if anyone wants to buy it for me, that would be great. But it's a whole process. And I think it's such a pain sometimes to have to refill all that water time and time again to then recycle a glass material. And then you have to buy a whole different device to use up that last bit of wax. But it's better to me than throwing it in the trash. So
Yeah. I think Newell's also another corporation that's been thinking really thoughtfully across all of their brands about recycling. And, to your point, it comes in a glass container. Plenty of people, I'm sure, were just pitching that into recycling, thinking like, oh, when they grind up the glass or something, like it must come out somewhere in the wash. Like, what you don't know is you've just contaminated now that entire glass stream.
Yeah. I think with all of these programs, one of the things I'm noticing is that as opposed to trying to fight convenience culture, TerraCycle has really leaned into it in conjunction with these brands, saying, we know you want to do the right thing, but we live in a time and age where it is sometimes easier to just throw it in the trash. If it's just as easy for you to put it in a box and send it to us, please do that. Because I think that's just the reality of the age that we live in, that if there is a convenience culture, let's find a way to make it work for us.
I think it's that, and I think you have to attack waste from multiple avenues, right? Because like you said, I'm not suddenly going to stop consuming, but I do want to someday be able to buy my juice in a glass bottle and be able to have that renewed, right? And that's that project Loop that TerraCycle's been working on for a long time. And I think what you'll find is a lot of the brands we work with are partnering with us both on Loop and on TerraCycle. There are some products like razors almost never going to be curbside recyclable, right? I'd be really hard stretched to think about a way to make that easily recyclable. Like there's just, we've evolved the way that we use things, and frankly, we've evolved technology to a point where certain things just won't be simple, single material, monomaterial, easy to recycle. And so we need to allow for that to exist because it's not going away. And we need to also be thinking in advance about how do we create durability? How do we create refillability? And I think the thing that's great about TerraCycle is that we can work with brands on both sides of that equation.
Absolutely. So these were just a selection of programs that TerraCycle offers. There are so many, and I will be sure to include a link down below for how people can find out more. But is there anything that you kind of wanted to tell the people about how they can find out more information, how they can start participating? Any tips or tricks?
So participating should be pretty simple. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. I think the great news is that almost all of our programs are brand funded. So there shouldn't be any cost on the consumer side. As you said before, I think the shipping label is prepaid for us, and it is. So what you do is you make an account on TerraCycle.com. And then from there, you can search our programs and find which program you are creating waste for. Collect to use. Sometimes there's a shipment threshold for how big we need the shipment to be before it can be sent. But collect the hard to recycle waste, download a UPS shipping label, and then send it in. And it's really that easy. So I think that there shouldn't be a deterrent to participating in TerraCycle.
Love to hear that. And hopefully a few people watching will make it a resolution to sign up for at least one TerraCycle program. If you wear contact lenses, I feel like that's the obvious solution.
I definitely hope so. I feel like, contact lenses, chip bags, like, think about all that like flex foil or like packaging that your food comes in, that's not recyclable. Like that to me is the stuff I create the most of, to be honest. I think that TerraCycle, and it's also amazing when you go through the site, how many things you're like, oh, I didn't know I could recycle that. And so it's just a fun site to browse.
Yeah, I think that's a great first step to maybe even just go to the website and see all the things that you guys have programs for and realize how many things don't go to municipal recycling.
Yeah, I could do better.
Yeah. This has been such a fun and enlightening conversation. Thank you so much, Kathy. As mentioned, I'll be including details and links in the description box for people to find everything about TerraCycle, maybe even find you and ping you with a few questions. Just wanted to leave it with you if you had any closing words for our viewers.
No, I first thank you for having me on your show and for continuing to enlighten people. I think recycling is a super complicated space, right? We're both in it and we're still learning things on a regular basis. I think that a lot of people can be intimidated by feeling like they don't know where to start. As we've been saying, I think TerraCycle is a really, really easy way to start. And to me, everything that you don't throw into a landfill is one less piece of trash, right? And so for me, any progress is great progress. And so I'd encourage all your listeners just to learn a little bit more and maybe participate in a program or two.
Excellent, excellent tips. Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you again, Kathy, for being on the show. And I'll see you guys next year. Is the last episode of the year.
Oh, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye.